The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. while I was brushing my teeth in my Denver hotel bathroom. The number on my screen made my stomach clench before I even answered. State Farm Insurance doesn't call you at dawn with good news. Miss Martinez, this is Robert Chen from State Farm. We need to discuss your Honda CR-V immediately. Our investigation shows your vehicle was involved in a hit-and-run accident in Austin yesterday evening. The other driver is claiming significant damages, and there are some concerning discrepancies in the police report. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My toothbrush clattered into the sink. I'm Jessica Martinez, and I'm a software developer for a fintech startup in Austin. Yesterday evening, I was 3 states away presenting our new mobile payment platform to potential investors. My silver 2022 Honda CR-V was supposed to be sitting safely in the long-term parking at Austin-Bergstrom International Airport, where I'd left it 4 days ago. Mr. Chen, there has to be some mistake. I'm in Denver on business. My car has been parked at the airport since Monday. The pause that followed lasted long enough for ice water to replace the blood in my veins. Miss Martinez, according to the police report, your vehicle struck a parked Mercedes in the Whole Foods parking lot on South Lamar at approximately 8:30 p.m. The driver fled the scene. Multiple witnesses provided your license plate number. I sank onto the hotel bed, my mind racing through possibilities. Car theft was the obvious explanation, but something about Mr. Chen's tone suggested this wasn't a simple case of random crime. Did the police recover any surveillance footage? That's part of what makes this complicated. The footage shows someone who appears familiar with your vehicle. They knew exactly how to adjust the mirrors and seat. They used the key fob, not force. Miss Martinez, who else has access to your car? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Only 3 people had spare keys to my Honda. My parents, David and Linda Martinez, who occasionally borrowed it when their landscaping business truck was being serviced, and my sister Rebecca, who I'd given a spare key to 6 months ago during a family emergency when her own car was repossessed. Rebecca Martinez had always been the family wild card. 2 years younger than my 28 years, she possessed an uncanny ability to turn minor setbacks into major catastrophes that somehow always required my intervention. When we were kids, I covered for her when she broke Mom's favorite vase. In high school, I paid her overdue library fines so she could graduate. College brought bigger problems. Failed classes that needed expensive summer school, maxed out credit cards that threatened her ability to finish her degree, and an endless parade of boyfriends who seemed to view my family as an ATM with particularly generous withdrawal limits. Last month's crisis involved their apartment complex threatening eviction for 3 months of unpaid rent. Rebecca called me sobbing at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, explaining how they'd been waiting for Kyle's big contract to come through, how they just needed a bridge loan, how they pay me back the moment his check cleared. $2,000 later, I learned from our mother that Kyle's big contract was actually a single weekend painting job that paid $300. The spare key to my Honda had been given to Rebecca during another manufactured emergency. Her piece of junk sedan had finally died, leaving her stranded at her waitressing job at a trendy East Austin brunch spot. She needed transportation to get to work while saving money for another used car. Being the responsible older sister, I offered temporary use of my vehicle during my work hours, since I lived close enough to take the bus downtown to my office. Just for a week or 2, Jess. I swear I'll have something figured out by then. 6 months later, Rebecca still didn't own a car, but the frequency of her borrowing mine had decreased significantly. I'd assumed she'd found other transportation solutions, or maybe Kyle had gotten his act together. The possibility that she had simply stopped asking permission while continuing to use my car had never occurred to me. Mr. Chen's voice pulled me back to the present moment. Miss Martinez, I need you to understand the severity of this situation. The Mercedes that was struck belongs to Dr. Patricia Wong, a prominent surgeon here in Austin. The damage is extensive enough to total her vehicle. We're looking at potentially $60,000 in claims. If we determine that your vehicle was being operated without your permission, this becomes a criminal matter. My hands trembled as I reached for my laptop. Mr. Chen, I need to check something. Can you give me 10 minutes and call me back? After he agreed, I immediately opened my Honda's mobile app. The vehicle's built-in GPS system had been one of the selling points when I'd purchased it last year. As a software developer, I appreciated the technology integration, but I'd never imagined I'd need to track my own car's unauthorized use. The GPS history made my stomach drop through the hotel room floor. Over the past 4 days, while I'd been in Denver, my Honda had been making regular trips around Austin. Tuesday morning, someone had driven it from the
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
airport parking lot to an East Austin address I recognized as Rebecca's apartment complex. From there, the vehicle had made daily excursions to various locations around the city: coffee shops, shopping centers, Kyle's construction job sites, and repeatedly to the Whole Foods on South Lamar. Wednesday evening's GPS data showed my car had been parked at that same Whole Foods for 3 hours, from 7 p.m. until just after 10 p.m. The timeline perfectly matched Mr. Chen's account of the hit-and-run incident. Someone had been using my vehicle as their personal transportation while I was out of town, and that someone had just caused a $60,000 accident. I screenshotted every GPS location and timestamp, my software developer instincts kicking in automatically. Evidence needed to be preserved before it could be deleted or manipulated. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca herself. "Hey sis, hope Denver is going great. Can't wait to hear about your presentation when you get back." The casual tone and complete absence of any mention of car accidents or insurance issues told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca wasn't planning to voluntarily confess to borrowing my car, let alone to causing a major accident while driving it. The cheery sister act was continuing as if nothing had happened. When Mr. Chen called back, I was ready with my GPS evidence. "Mr. Chen, I have definitive proof that my car was taken without my permission. I can provide GPS data showing the vehicle's location throughout my entire business trip." "That's helpful, Miss Martinez. But we still need to determine who was driving. Do you have any idea who might have taken your vehicle?" The question forced me to confront a reality I'd been avoiding. Accusing Rebecca of car theft would destroy what remained of our relationship and likely split our family permanently. My parents had always favored her, viewing her struggles as evidence that she needed more support rather than consequences. They'd grown accustomed to my role as the family problem solver, the responsible daughter who cleaned up messes and covered shortfalls without complaint. But $60,000 in damages crossed a line I couldn't uncross. This wasn't about lending money or covering rent. This was about criminal activity committed using my property, activity that could destroy my credit, my insurance rates, and potentially my career if legal complications arose. "Mr. Chen, I believe my sister took my car without permission. She has a spare key, and the GPS data shows the vehicle was at her apartment complex." "I see. Miss Martinez, given the circumstances, I'm going to recommend you file a police report for vehicle theft. This will help establish that you weren't responsible for the accident. However, you should know that filing such a report against a family member can have serious legal consequences for them." After ending the call with Mr. Chen, I sat in my hotel room staring at my phone. My presentation to the Denver investors was scheduled for 2 hours, potentially the most important meeting of my career. The mobile payment platform I'd spent 18 months developing could revolutionize how small businesses process transactions. Success today could mean a promotion, stock options, and financial security I'd never experienced. Instead, I was dealing with family drama that threatened to overshadow everything I'd worked for. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been building technology to help other people manage their money,
My own sister had been stealing my car and potentially destroying my financial future. My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed my mother's number. Mija, how's Denver? Your father and I are so proud of you, presenting to those big investors. Linda Martinez had immigrated from Mexico as a teenager, building a life in Austin through determination and hard work. She and her father had started their landscaping business with a single pickup truck and built it into a successful operation that employed 12 people. Their success had come through careful planning, honest work, and maintaining strong relationships with their clients. Despite their own achievements, they'd always treated Rebecca and me differently. I was the stable one, expected to excel without praise or recognition. Rebecca was the delicate one, requiring constant support and protection from life's consequences. This dynamic had shaped our family relationships for decades, creating an unspoken agreement that my successes belonged to everyone, while Rebecca's failures were everyone's responsibility to fix. But $60,000 in damages crossed a line I couldn't uncross. This wasn't about lending money or covering rent. This was about criminal activity committed using my property, activity that could destroy my credit, my insurance rates, and potentially my career if legal complications arose. Mom, I need to ask you something important. Has Rebecca been using my car while I'm in Denver? The pause that followed was answer enough. Why would you ask that, Mija? Because my insurance company just called. My car was involved in a hit-and-run accident last night. Someone driving my Honda struck another vehicle and fled the scene. That's impossible. Your car is at the airport. No, Mom, it's not. I have GPS proof that someone has been driving it around Austin for the past 4 days. The only people with spare keys are you, Dad, and Rebecca. Another pause, longer this time. Maybe Rebecca borrowed it for something important. You know she's been struggling since losing her job. The casual way my mother dismissed car theft as borrowing for something important crystallized years of family dysfunction into a single moment of clarity. Rebecca hadn't just taken my car. She had involved our parents in covering up her actions, and now they were prepared to minimize criminal behavior to protect her from consequences. Mom, this isn't borrowing. Taking someone's car without permission is theft. The accident she caused could cost $60,000 in damages. Don't be so dramatic, Jess. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. Rebecca would never do anything to hurt you. But Rebecca had hurt me repeatedly and systematically with the full support of our parents. The difference was $60,000.
That this time, there was legal documentation, insurance companies involved, and consequences that couldn't be smoothed over with family guilt trips and emotional manipulation. My presentation in Denver went better than I dared hope. The investors responded enthusiastically to our mobile payment platform, asking detailed questions about scalability and market penetration that suggested genuine interest in funding our next development phase. Under normal circumstances, I would have celebrated with my team, enjoying the satisfaction of months of hard work paying off. Instead, I spent the evening in my hotel room researching Texas vehicle theft laws and documenting everything I knew about Rebecca's unauthorized use of my Honda. The legal websites made sobering reading. Unauthorized use of a motor vehicle was a felony in Texas, punishable by up to 2 years in prison and fines up to $10,000. If the prosecution could prove intent to permanently deprive the owner of their vehicle, the charges could escalate to grand theft auto. Rebecca's situation had just become exponentially more serious than unpaid rent or maxed out credit cards. This was criminal behavior with potential federal implications, especially if she'd driven my car across state lines during my business trip. My phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. This one including photos of her and Kyle at some East Austin bar, cocktails in hand, carefree smiles suggesting they had no awareness of the legal storm brewing around them. The timestamp showed the photos were taken just hours after the hit-and-run accident. While Dr. Wong was dealing with her totaled Mercedes and I was fielding calls from insurance investigators, Rebecca was celebrating whatever had prompted her joy. The final text of the evening came from Kyle himself, something that had never happened before. "Hey Jess, hope business trip is going awesome. Becca and I are thinking about taking a road trip to Colorado this weekend. Any recommendations for Denver restaurants?" The audacity was breathtaking. They were planning to use my stolen car for a romantic getaway to the very city where I was working, apparently confident that I'd provide restaurant recommendations for their criminal adventure. The complete disconnect from reality suggested that Rebecca had successfully convinced Kyle that her use of my vehicle was authorized, or that Kyle was an active participant in the theft. Either way, their weekend road trip plans weren't happening. Tomorrow morning, I was flying back to Austin with a legal strategy and enough evidence to end the situation permanently. Rebecca's pattern of consequences-free bad decisions was about to collide with the real world in ways that family loyalty couldn't protect her from. As I finally tried to sleep in my Denver hotel room, I wondered if I was making the right choice. Family relationships are irreplaceable, and destroying them over material possessions seems petty to people who've never experienced systematic exploitation. But some violations cut too deep for forgiveness, especially when they're accompanied by lies, manipulation, and the casual assumption that your siblings exist to clean up your mistakes. Rebecca had stolen my car, caused a major accident, and was planning to compound her crimes with an interstate joyride. The time for family meetings and emotional appeals had passed. Tomorrow, I was calling the police. The flight back to Austin felt endless. Every bump of turbulence reminded me of the conversation I was dreading. But I'd made my decision somewhere over New Mexico. Rebecca needed to face what she'd done, and I needed answers before involving law enforcement. I called her from the airport shuttle, watching familiar Austin landmarks blur past through rain-streaked windows. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice unusually cheerful. "Jess, you're back early. How was Denver? Did those investors love your presentation?" The enthusiasm felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing casual conversation to deflect from more serious topics. "Rebecca, we need to talk. Are you home?" "Actually, Kyle and I were just heading out to grab dinner. Can it wait until tomorrow? We're trying this new place in the warehouse district that everyone's raving about." New restaurants weren't cheap, especially in Austin's trendy downtown areas. Rebecca's unemployment benefits had ended 2 months ago, and Kyle's sporadic construction work barely covered their basic expenses. The casual mention of expensive dining while owing thousands in back rent raised questions about their sudden financial improvement. "Rebecca, this can't wait. Where are you right now?" A pause, then muffled conversation in the background. Kyle's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. We're at the apartment. But seriously, Jess, can we do this tomorrow? I've been looking forward to tonight out all week." "I'm coming over. Don't go anywhere." The East Austin apartment complex where Rebecca lived with Kyle had seen better decades. Built in the 1970s as affordable housing, it now served primarily as temporary shelter for people between better situations. The parking lot was a maze of potholes and abandoned shopping carts, surrounded by units with peeling paint and air conditioning units that wheezed audibly even in October weather. Rebecca's apartment was on the 2nd floor, accessible via an external staircase that creaked ominously under my weight. Before I could knock, the door opened to reveal Kyle Thompson in all his mediocre glory. 6 feet tall, with the kind of artificially enhanced muscles that come from consistent gym attendance and inconsistent employment, he possessed the confident swagger of someone who'd never experienced real consequences for his actions. Space, which was cluttered with empty takeout containers, energy drink cans, and Kyle's collection of supplement bottles. The apartment smelled like fast food and the vanilla air freshener that couldn't quite mask underlying odors of neglect. Rebecca emerged from the bathroom wearing a dress I didn't recognize, something that looked expensive and new. Her makeup was freshly applied, her hair styled in a way that suggested she'd spent considerable time and money at a salon recently. For someone who'd been crying poverty for months, she looked remarkably well-maintained. "Jess, I'm so excited to hear about Denver." She moved to hug me, but I stepped back, maintaining distance. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have you been using my car while I was out of town?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, calculation, and finally a forced laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Your car? Jess, what are you talking about? Your car is at the airport, remember? You showed me the parking receipt before you left. Kyle nodded supportively, though his expression suggested he was hearing this information for the first time. Yeah, Rebecca mentioned you flew out of Austin for work. She's been taking the bus everywhere this week. The lie was so smoothly delivered that I almost doubted my own evidence. Rebecca had always been skilled at creating alternative versions of reality that painted her in the most favorable light possible. Throughout our childhood, she'd convinced our parents that broken household items were accidents, missing money was misplaced rather than taken, and failing grades were the result of unfair teachers rather than lack of effort. Rebecca, my insurance company called this morning. My Honda was involved in a hit-and-run accident yesterday evening in the Whole Foods parking lot on South Lamar. The damage to the other vehicle is extensive enough to total it. Rebecca's face went through another series of rapid changes, finally settling on bewildered innocence. That's impossible. There must be some mistake with the license plate or something. Maybe someone has plates similar to yours. The GPS data from my car shows it's been driven around Austin for the past 4 days. It was at your apartment complex Tuesday morning and at that specific Whole Foods location during the exact time frame of the accident. Kyle's supporting nod slowed to a stop. His eyes darted between Rebecca and me as he processed information that clearly contradicted whatever story she'd been telling him. Rebecca, however, doubled down on her denial with increasing urgency. GPS data can be wrong, Jess. You know technology glitches all the time. Remember when your phone said you were in San Antonio and you were actually at home? This is probably the same kind of error. The deflection attempt was classic Rebecca, turning a discussion about her behavior into criticism of technology or other external factors. She'd used similar tactics to explain away maxed-out credit cards, missed work shifts, and relationship failures throughout her adult life. The pattern was so familiar that I almost fell into it automatically, but $60,000 in damages had a way of clarifying priorities. Rebecca, I also have photos from the Whole Foods security cameras showing someone who looks exactly like you getting out of my Honda right before the accident occurred. This wasn't true, but I wanted to see her reaction. Rebecca's eyes widened briefly before she recovered her composure, though Kyle had gone completely silent beside her. Jess, you're really starting to scare me. Why would you think I would do something like that? I'm your sister. I would never put you in that kind of position. The appeal to family loyalty was another predictable move. Throughout our lives, Rebecca had used our sibling relationship as both shield and sword, protecting herself from consequences while demanding my support for increasingly questionable decisions. The strategy had worked consistently because I'd allowed it to work, prioritizing family harmony over personal boundaries. Rebecca, I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you take my car without permission? Kyle suddenly spoke up, his voice uncertain. Becca, didn't you say your sister let you borrow her car this week? You said she left you the keys before her trip. The moment stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger at Kyle's accidental revelation, then immediately softened as she turned back to me with a new strategy. Okay, fine, I did borrow your car, but just a couple times when I really needed transportation for job interviews. You've let me use it before, and I thought it would be okay since you were out of town anyway. I was going to tell you when you got back. The partial confession was progress, but the casual tone suggested she still didn't understand the severity of the situation. Borrowing implied permission. What she'd done was theft, regardless of family relationships or previous arrangements. Rebecca, taking someone's vehicle without permission is not borrowing. It's theft. And the accident you caused while driving my stolen car has created a legal nightmare that could destroy both our lives. It wasn't theft, Jess. God, you're being so dramatic. It's not like I was planning to keep it forever. And the accident was tiny, barely a scratch. The other driver is probably just trying to scam the insurance company. Kyle's expression had shifted to concern as he processed the implications of what he was hearing. Becca, you told me your sister said you could use her car. You said she left it for you on purpose. Deliberate planning, not the impulsive mistake she was now claiming. Kyle, she lied to you. I never gave her permission to use my car, and I certainly never left it for her to drive while I was traveling. She took it from the airport parking lot without my knowledge. Kyle's face went pale as he realized his own potential culpability. Rebecca,
Please tell me you didn't use Jess's car for our dinner dates this week. Please tell me you haven't been driving around in a stolen vehicle while I was with you." The question revealed another layer of the situation I hadn't considered. Kyle had been a passenger in my stolen vehicle, potentially making him an accessory to Rebecca's crimes. If they'd crossed state lines or committed other offenses while using my car, his legal exposure could be significant. Rebecca's defensive walls finally began crumbling under the weight of Kyle's questions and my evidence. "Fine, yes, I took your stupid car, but I needed transportation, and you never use it anyway. You work from home half the time and take the bus everywhere else. It was just sitting there wasting away while I'm stuck taking rideshares I can't afford." The admission was accompanied by increasing anger, as if my reaction to her theft was unreasonable, rather than her theft itself. Rebecca had always possessed a remarkable ability to reframe her bad decisions as other people's failures to accommodate her needs. "Rebecca, the accident you caused while driving my car involves $60,000 in damages. The other driver's Mercedes is totaled. My insurance company is investigating whether to file criminal charges." Kyle stepped away from Rebecca as the full implications hit him. "Criminal charges? Becca, what exactly happened in that parking lot?" "It was an accident! I was backing out of a parking space and hit some fancy car. I looked around for the owner, but they weren't anywhere nearby, so I figured I'd come back later to leave a note." The story didn't match the timeline or the security footage descriptions Mr. Chen had provided. Rebecca's version painted her as a responsible citizen who'd made an innocent mistake. But hit-and-run accidents involved fleeing the scene immediately, not returning later to leave notes. "Rebecca, hit and run means you left without reporting the accident or providing your information. That's a felony in Texas, especially when the damages exceed a certain threshold." Kyle ran his hands through his hair, his usual confident demeanor replaced by visible panic. "Rebecca, we need to call the police right now and explain what happened. If you go to them voluntarily, maybe they'll be more lenient." "We're not calling anyone." Rebecca's voice rose to near shouting. "Jess, you have to fix this. Tell your insurance company it was a mistake, that you gave me permission. Tell them whatever you need to tell them to make this go away." The demand was breathtaking in its audacity. Rebecca wanted me to commit insurance fraud to cover up her vehicle theft and hit-and-run accident. She expected me to lie to investigators, risk my own criminal liability, and potentially destroy my career to protect her from the consequences of her choices. "Rebecca, I'm not lying to insurance investigators. I'm not committing fraud to cover up your crimes. You stole my car, caused a major accident, and fled the scene. Those are your choices and your consequences." The silence that followed was broken by Kyle's phone buzzing with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, then at Rebecca with an expression I couldn't identify. "It's my buddy Marcus from the body shop. He's been texting me all week about some silver Honda that came in with front-end damage. He wanted to know if I knew anyone who needed quick off-the-books repair work." Rebecca's face went white as Kyle answered the call on speaker. "Kyle, man, I need to talk to you about that Honda situation. The girl who brought it in Wednesday night paid cash for the work. But something felt off about the whole thing. She was nervous as hell and kept asking if we could have it ready by Friday. Then, this morning, some insurance investigator called asking about accident damage on a car matching that exact description." Kyle's eyes never left Rebecca's face as Marcus continued. "Dude, I think that girl brought us a stolen car to fix. The insurance guy said they're working with Austin PD on a hit-and-run case. If that Honda is connected to what he's investigating, we could all be in serious trouble." The final piece of Rebecca's deception clicked into place. She hadn't just stolen my car and caused an accident. She'd attempted to cover up the evidence by having the damage repaired before I returned from Denver. The cash payment for bodywork explained their recent ability to afford expensive dinners and new clothes. Rebecca had been using my stolen vehicle to generate income through some means I didn't yet understand. Kyle ended the call and stared at Rebecca with a mixture of betrayal and fear. "You told me that Honda belonged to your cousin who needed a favor. You said she'd hit a deer and needed the damage fixed quickly for insurance purposes. You paid Marcus $800 in cash for that work. Where did you get $800 in cash, Rebecca?" My question cut through the apartment's tension like a blade. Her answer came out in a whisper. "I've been driving for rideshare companies using your car. The insurance and registration are in your name, so I could sign up as a driver without having my own vehicle. I've made almost $3,000 this month. The final revelation was staggering. Rebecca hadn't just stolen my car for personal transportation, she'd stolen my identity to operate an illegal taxi service, putting countless strangers in my vehicle while exposing me to enormous liability for any accidents, injuries, or crimes that occurred during those rides. Kyle was backing toward the door, clearly recognizing that his relationship with Rebecca had just become a legal catastrophe. Jess, I swear I had no idea. She told me she was doing food delivery for extra money. I never knew she was using your car.
Car or your identity. Rebecca finally broke down completely, sobbing as the full scope of her situation became clear. Jess, please, you have to help me. If I get arrested, I'll lose everything. Kyle will leave me, Mom and Dad will disown me, and I'll never be able to get another job. Please, I'm begging you to fix this. But some things can't be fixed, especially when they're built on layers of lies, theft, and betrayal. Rebecca had stolen my car, my identity, and potentially my future. The time for sisterly protection had ended the moment she chose criminal activity over honest conversation. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. It was time to let professionals handle what family loyalty couldn't fix. Officer Sarah Williams arrived within 15 minutes of my 911 call, her patrol car's presence immediately transforming the apartment complex parking lot into a scene of neighborhood curiosity. Through Rebecca's second-floor window, I watched residents emerge from their units, some recording with their phones, while others whispered behind partially open doors. Rebecca had spent those 15 minutes alternating between hysterical sobbing and angry demands that I cancel the police call. Kyle had disappeared entirely, claiming he needed to walk his dog, though I'd never seen evidence of any pet during previous visits. The apartment felt smaller with each passing minute, filled with the weight of years of accumulated lies finally coming to light. Officer Williams was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with a kind of professional demeanor that suggested extensive experience dealing with family disputes that had escalated beyond private resolution. She listened to my initial explanation with careful attention, taking notes in a small pad while Rebecca sat on the couch clutching a box of tissues. Miss Martinez, I understand your sister took your vehicle without permission and was involved in an accident while operating it illegally as a rideshare. Can you provide documentation of your ownership and any evidence of unauthorized use? I handed her my vehicle registration, insurance cards, and screenshots of the GPS tracking data from the past week. Officer Williams examined each document methodically, occasionally glancing at Rebecca, who had stopped crying but maintained an expression of wounded innocence. Miss Rebecca Martinez, is this your current address? Officer Williams consulted her notepad. I need to inform you that operating a motor vehicle without the owner's permission constitutes unauthorized use of a motor vehicle under Texas Penal Code Section 31.07. Additionally, using someone else's identity to register for commercial driving services may constitute identity theft under Section 32.51. Rebecca's eyes darted at me with desperate pleading. Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. My sister has let me borrow her car before. I thought this time was the same thing. Ma'am, borrowing requires explicit permission from the owner. Did your sister give you specific permission to use her vehicle during her business trip to Denver? The question hung in the apartment's stale air. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed several times before she whispered, "No, but she's family. I didn't think I needed formal permission." Officer Williams made additional notes. Miss Rebecca Martinez, I'm also going to need information about the rideshare company you've been driving for and any income you've generated using the vehicle. Commercial operation of someone else's vehicle without proper insurance and licensing creates additional legal complications. The mention of insurance implications made my stomach clench. If Rebecca had been operating my personal vehicle commercially, my insurance policy might not cover accidents that occurred during rideshare activities. The hit-and-run damage to Dr. Wong's Mercedes could potentially become my personal financial responsibility if my insurance company denied coverage based on unauthorized use.
Officer Williams, what does this mean for my insurance situation? My agent mentioned $60,000 in damages from the accident Rebecca caused. That's beyond my expertise, but you should contact your insurance company immediately to report that your vehicle was being operated without permission for commercial purposes. They'll need to investigate whether your policy covers unauthorized use. Rebecca finally found her voice again, though it came out as a desperate whisper. Jess, please don't let them arrest me. I'll pay back every penny I made from the rideshare driving. I'll get a job and make payments to your insurance company. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't press charges. Officer Williams looked between us with the patient expression of someone who'd mediated hundreds of similar family conflicts. Miss Jessica Martinez, I need to explain your options. You can choose to pursue criminal charges for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle and potentially identity theft. Alternatively, you can decline to press charges, though the hit-and-run accident will still be investigated separately by the traffic division. The choice felt impossibly heavy. Pressing charges would likely result in Rebecca's arrest, creating a criminal record that would destroy her employment prospects and permanently damage our family relationships. Not pressing charges would send the message that her behavior was acceptable and leave me financially responsible for damage I didn't cause. Officer Williams, I need time to think about this. What happens if I don't decide right now? Nothing immediate happens to your sister regarding the vehicle theft, but I still need to document this incident for the insurance investigation. The hit-and-run case will proceed regardless of your decision about the unauthorized use charges. Rebecca seized on this information like a lifeline. See, Jess, the hit-and-run investigation is separate. You don't need to destroy my life over this. We can work it out as a family. But working things out as a family had been our pattern for Rebecca's entire
Adult life, and each resolution had only enabled larger problems. The rideshare scheme represented a quantum leap in both planning and deception that suggested she'd moved beyond impulsive bad decisions into calculated criminal behavior. Officer Williams spent another 30 minutes documenting the situation, photographing my vehicle registration and taking detailed statements from both Rebecca and me. She also collected information about Kyle's involvement, though his hasty departure suggested he understood his potential legal exposure better than Rebecca did. Miss Jessica Martinez, here's my card with the incident report number. You'll need this for your insurance company and to reference if you decide to pursue charges. I recommend consulting with a lawyer before making any final decisions. After Officer Williams left, Rebecca and I sat in silence while the apartment complex gradually returned to its normal evening routine. The neighbors who'd gathered to watch the police drama dispersed back to their own lives, leaving us alone with the wreckage of our relationship. Jess, I know you're angry, but we can fix this. We're sisters. Sisters don't send each other to jail over misunderstandings. The word misunderstanding carried no weight anymore. Rebecca's theft of my car, identity, and potential financial future couldn't be minimized with euphemisms or family guilt trips. The calculated nature of her deception, from the rideshare registration to the bodywork cover-up, demonstrated premeditation that went far beyond momentary lapses in judgment. Rebecca, this isn't a misunderstanding. You stole my car, used my identity to start an illegal business, caused a major accident, and tried to cover up the evidence. Those are conscious choices, not mistakes. But I was desperate. Kyle and I were about to get evicted, and I couldn't find work anywhere. The rideshare money was keeping us afloat while I figured out something more permanent. The desperation defense was another familiar pattern. Throughout our lives, Rebecca's emergencies had justified increasingly questionable behavior, from borrowing money she couldn't repay to now stealing vehicles and identities. Each crisis was presented as unique and temporary, requiring immediate assistance that, somehow, never led to long-term stability. Rebecca, being desperate doesn't make theft legal. Thousands of people face financial difficulties without resorting to stealing from family members. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Mr. Chen at State Farm. I answered while Rebecca watched with obvious anxiety.
Miss Martinez, I have updates on your case. Our investigation has confirmed that your vehicle was being operated without your permission at the time of the accident. However, we've discovered that the vehicle was registered with two different rideshare companies under your name and insurance information. The news hit like cold water. Mr. Chen, I never registered with any rideshare companies. I don't even have the proper commercial insurance for that type of driving. That's what makes this complicated. Someone used your identity and vehicle information to create driver accounts with both companies. They generated significant income over the past 6 months, which creates tax implications and potential fraud charges beyond the vehicle theft. Rebecca's face went ashen as she realized the conversation was about her expanding legal problems. The rideshare registration fraud she dismissed as a minor technicality was actually a federal crime with serious consequences. Mr. Chen, what does this mean for the accident coverage? Your personal auto policy doesn't cover commercial activities, so we'll be denying coverage for the Mercedes damage. However, since the rideshare companies believe they were insuring an authorized driver, they may have liability coverage. This will require extensive investigation and likely litigation. The call ended with Mr. Chin promising to send detailed documentation of Rebecca's fraudulent rideshare registrations. I turned to find my sister staring at me with an expression of dawning horror. Jess, what did he mean about tax implications? Rebecca, if you made $3,000 this month driving rideshare, you probably made significantly more over 6 months. That's unreported income that will need to be declared to the IRS. You've committed tax evasion in addition to everything else. The apartment's walls seemed to close in as the full scope of Rebecca's situation became clear. What had started as unauthorized borrowing of my car had evolved into a complex web of identity theft, insurance fraud, tax evasion, and federal crimes that could result in years of prison time. Kyle returned an hour later, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious fear. Becca, I talked to my buddy Marcus at the body shop. He says insurance investigators have been calling all day asking about that Honda repair work. They know about the cash payment and want to interview everyone involved. Rebecca buried her face in her hands. This is turning into a nightmare. Everything I touch turns to disaster. Rebecca, you created this disaster through deliberate choices. Stealing my car wasn't something that happened to you. Operating illegal rideshare services wasn't bad luck. These were calculated decisions that you knew were wrong. Kyle sat heavily on the couch beside Rebecca, his usual swagger completely absent. Becca, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did you ever drive rideshare passengers while I was in the car with you? The question revealed another layer of potential complications. If Kyle had been present during Rebecca's illegal rideshare activities, he could be considered an accomplice to her crimes. Maybe a few times when we were heading somewhere anyway. I figured it was efficient to pick up passengers going in the same direction. Kyle's groan was audible across the small apartment. Rebecca, that makes me an accessory to your fraud scheme.
Prison because you lied to me about what you were doing. The relationship dynamics I was witnessing felt like a preview of what would happen with our family when the full truth emerged. Kyle's realization that Rebecca's lies had created legal jeopardy for him mirrored what I'd experienced discovering that my identity and assets had been used without permission. My phone rang again, this time displaying my mother's number. I hesitated before answering, knowing that Rebecca had probably already crafted a version of events that painted her as the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of her own problems. Mija, Rebecca called me crying about some insurance trouble with your car. She said there was an accident and you're threatening to involve the police. What's going on? Linda Martinez's voice carried the particular tone she reserved for mediating conflicts between her daughters, an assumption that both parties shared equal responsibility for whatever had gone wrong. Mom, Rebecca stole my car from the airport while I was in Denver. She's been using it to drive for rideshare companies using my identity. She caused a hit-and-run accident that totaled another person's vehicle, and she tried to cover up the evidence by having my car repaired without telling me. The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. Mija, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Rebecca said you'd given her permission to use the car and that the accident was minor. Mom,
I have GPS evidence showing my car was driven around Austin for 4 days without my permission. I have documentation of Rebecca registering for rideshare services using my name and insurance. The police have already taken a report. You called the police on your own sister? The question carried decades of family programming that positioned my protection of Rebecca as a moral obligation regardless of her behavior. Growing up, I'd been expected to cover for her mistakes, share my possessions without complaint, and accept responsibility for maintaining family harmony, even when I was the injured party. Mom, Rebecca committed multiple felonies using my identity and property. She's created legal and financial problems that could destroy both our lives. This isn't something I can fix with family negotiations. But she's your sister, Mija. Family protects family. Whatever she did wrong, we can work it out without involving strangers. The conversation felt like every other family crisis we'd navigated throughout my adult life. Rebecca's problems became everyone's problems, while my boundaries and well-being were treated as secondary concerns that could be sacrificed for family unity. Mom, Rebecca's insurance company has already denied coverage for the accident because Rebecca was using my car commercially without authorization. I could be personally liable for $60,000 in damages, plus whatever legal fees this generates. Your father and I will help however we can, but please don't let this destroy our family over money problems. The casual dismissal of $60,000 as mere money problems illustrated the disconnect between my parents' perception and reality. Their landscaping business was successful, but not wealthy enough to absorb that kind of financial catastrophe, especially not when it resulted from Rebecca's criminal activity. Mom, this isn't about money. It's about Rebecca stealing my property, using my identity to commit fraud, and then lying about it when confronted. Those aren't money problems, they're character problems. After ending the call with my mother, I realized that my family's response to Rebecca's crimes would follow the same pattern as every previous crisis. They would minimize her actions, emphasize her desperation as justification, and pressure me to absorb the consequences to preserve family relationships. But some violations cut too deep for family loyalty to heal. Rebecca had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and my parents' enabling had created the conditions that made her escalating criminal behavior possible. Kyle was gathering his belongings while Rebecca pleaded with him to stay and work through their problems together. His response was brutally honest. "Becca, you lied to me about everything. The car, the money, the rideshare driving, all of it. I can't trust anything you say anymore, and I definitely can't stay in a relationship with someone whose legal problems might land me in prison." Rebecca's sobs intensified as Kyle packed his few possessions into a gym bag, but her tears carried no weight with someone who discovered that loving her meant becoming an unwilling accomplice to her crimes. After Kyle left, Rebecca turned to me with the same desperate pleading she'd used throughout our childhood when consequences finally caught up with her choices. "Jess, please don't abandon me too. I know I messed up, but I'm still your sister. We can get through this together if you help me figure out what to do." But getting through this together had been our pattern for decades, and it had only enabled Rebecca's progression from minor boundary violations to major felonies. The time for family solutions had ended when her problems became criminal matters that required professional intervention. I stood up and gathered my purse, leaving Rebecca sitting alone in the apartment that would probably be empty within days when the eviction she'd been trying to prevent finally occurred. "Rebecca, I'm not abandoning you. I'm protecting myself from the consequences of your choices. There's a difference, even if our family has never acknowledged it." Walking down the creaking external staircase for what I knew would be the last time, I realized that some relationships don't survive accountability. Rebecca would need to face her legal problems without my protection, and I would need to rebuild my life without her constant crises defining my priorities. The drive home in my recovered Honda felt different somehow, like I was driving
someone else's car despite the familiar dashboard and seat settings. Rebecca's use of my vehicle for illegal activities had violated something fundamental about the space that even professional cleaning couldn't restore. Tomorrow, I would need to contact lawyers, insurance adjusters, and potentially federal investigators as Rebecca's crimes expanded beyond local jurisdiction. Tonight, I would sleep in my own bed without worrying about family emergencies that required my immediate financial intervention. For the first time in years, Rebecca's problems would remain Rebecca's problems to solve. 2 weeks later, the family meeting my parents had been demanding finally took place at Chili's on North Lamar.
a choice that felt deliberately casual for the gravity of what we needed to discuss. My father, David, had insisted on neutral territory, claiming that restaurant settings would keep emotions under control and force everyone to behave civilly. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were meeting in public because my family couldn't trust themselves to have an honest conversation in private. Rebecca arrived 20 minutes late, walking through the restaurant doors with a kind of theatrical entrance that suggested she'd been sitting in the parking lot timing her arrival for maximum impact. She'd lost weight since Kyle moved out, and her usually meticulous appearance showed signs of stress and financial strain. The expensive dress she'd worn during our confrontation had been replaced with clothes that looked borrowed or purchased from discount stores. My parents flanked her as they approached the booth where I'd been waiting, a formation that immediately established the dynamics of this gathering. Linda and David Martinez positioned themselves as Rebecca's advocates and protectors, while I occupied the role of unreasonable aggressor who was threatening family unity over trivial grievances. "Mija, thank you for agreeing to meet with us," my mother began, her voice carrying the forced brightness she reserved for situations where she was determined to maintain optimism despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. "We're here because we love both our daughters and want to find a solution that works for everyone." David nodded in agreement while Rebecca studied her menu with exaggerated concentration, avoiding eye contact with me entirely. The performance felt rehearsed, like they'd spent considerable time preparing their approach to this conversation. "Mom, I'm here because you said it was important to you, but I want to be clear about something from the beginning. Rebecca committed multiple felonies using my identity and property. This isn't a family disagreement that can be resolved through compromise." "Now, Princesa, let's not use such harsh language," my father interjected, employing the childhood nickname that had always served as his signal that I was being unreasonably dramatic. "Rebecca made some poor choices, but calling them felonies makes everything sound more serious than it needs to be." The casual dismissal of federal crimes as poor choices captured everything wrong with our family's approach to Rebecca's behavior. Throughout our lives, her actions had been consistently reframed as mistakes, misunderstandings, or responses to circumstances beyond her control. This pattern of minimization had enabled her progression from childhood misbehavior to adult criminality. "Dad, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle is a felony in Texas. Identity theft is a federal crime. Tax evasion carries prison sentences. These aren't my characterizations. They're legal definitions that professionals have explained to me extensively over the past 2 weeks." Rebecca finally looked up from her menu, her eyes red-rimmed with tears that appeared genuine. "Jess, I know I messed up badly. I know I hurt you and violated your trust, but I was desperate and I made terrible decisions when I was scared about losing everything." The apology felt practiced, like she'd rehearsed it multiple times to achieve the right balance of contrition and explanation. Rebecca had always been skilled at crafting responses that acknowledged wrongdoing while subtly shifting responsibility to external circumstances that had forced her hand. Rebecca, being scared doesn't justify stealing someone's car and identity. Thousands of people face financial difficulties without resorting to committing crimes against their family members. "But we're not talking about thousands of people," Linda interrupted, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "We're talking about your sister, who was facing homelessness and couldn't find work anywhere. She reached out for help the only way she knew how." The reframing of systematic theft and fraud as reaching out for help demonstrated the cognitive dissonance that had characterized our family's response to Rebecca's escalating problems. My parents had constructed a narrative where Rebecca's crimes were actually desperate attempts of communication, making me the villain for failing to understand her coded pleas for assistance. "Mom, Rebecca didn't reach out for help. She stole my car from an airport parking lot and used my identity to commit fraud for 6 months. If she'd reached out for help, she would have called me and explained her situation honestly." "She was afraid you'd say no," David said quietly, his weathered hands folded on the table between us. "Rebecca knew you were stressed about your work and didn't want to burden you with more financial problems." The suggestion that Rebecca stole my car out of consideration for my stress levels was so absurd that I almost laughed. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd been documenting the expanding scope of her crimes. Rebecca made over $18,000 driving rideshare with my car over 6 months. She wasn't desperately seeking help. She was operating a profitable illegal business using my assets and identity. The number visibly shocked my parents, who apparently had been told a much smaller number.
Figure that supported their narrative of desperate survival rather than calculated criminal enterprise. Rebecca's face flushed with embarrassment as her careful management of information fell apart. $18,000? Linda's voice carried a note of betrayal that suggested Rebecca had been as dishonest with our parents as she'd been with me. Rebecca, you told us you'd only made a few $100s to cover basic expenses. The amount doesn't matter, Rebecca said defensively, though her voice lacked conviction. I was going to pay Jess back every penny once I got back on my feet. Rebecca, you spent $800 repairing my car to cover up evidence of the hit-and-run accident. You weren't planning to pay me back. You were planning to hide what you'd done permanently. David leaned forward with the expression he'd always worn when trying to broker peace between his daughters during childhood disputes. Princessa, maybe Rebecca was handling things wrong, but her intentions were good. She was trying to fix the problem before you found out, so you wouldn't have to worry about it. The suggestion that covering up crimes was actually protective behavior illustrated the twisted logic that had enabled Rebecca's progression from minor boundary violations to major felonies. In our family's value system, Rebecca's comfort took precedence over everyone else's reality, including legal reality. Dad, covering up hit-and-run accidents isn't fixing problems, it's compounding crimes. Rebecca didn't repair my car to protect me. She did it to protect herself from consequences. Our server approached the table with the tentative expression of someone who could sense family tension, but needed to do their job anyway. We ordered drinks and appetizers that none of us would touch, going through the motions of a normal family dinner while discussing criminal behavior and federal investigations. After the server left, Rebecca finally abandoned her defensive posture and collapsed into what appeared to be genuine despair. I know I ruined everything. I know Kyle left because of what I did, and now I'm going to lose my apartment because I can't make rent without the rideshare money. I've destroyed my life and hurt everyone I care about. The admission was the closest she'd come to taking full responsibility for her choices, but it was accompanied by the familiar undertone of victimhood that had characterized her approach to every crisis throughout our adult lives. Rebecca, you didn't ruin everything accidentally. You made specific choices to steal my car, use my identity, and lie about what you were doing. Those weren't mistakes, they were decisions. But what am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice rising with panic. I can't get a job because background checks show pending criminal investigations. I can't afford a lawyer because I spent all the rideshare money on rent and bills. I can't even apply for legitimate work because I'm terrified the police will arrest me. The litany of consequences was accurate, but Rebecca presented them as unfair persecution rather than natural results of her criminal activity. She'd created an impossible situation for herself and was now seeking family intervention to escape accountability. Rebecca, you're supposed to face the consequences of your choices like an adult. You're supposed to hire a lawyer, cooperate with investigators, and accept whatever legal penalties result from your crimes. Linda reached across the table to grasp Rebecca's hand with fierce protectiveness. Mija, your sister is asking for help, not a lecture. This family has always supported each other through difficult times. Mom, this family has always enabled Rebecca's bad decisions by protecting her from consequences. That pattern is exactly what led her to committing federal crimes. Jessica, that's enough. David's voice carried the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood when my questions or complaints threatened family stability. Rebecca is your sister, and she needs our support now more than ever. We didn't raise you to abandon family when things get difficult. The familiar guilt trip carried less weight than it once had. partly because I'd spent 2 weeks consulting with lawyers who'd helped me understand the scope of my own legal exposure. Rebecca's use of my identity for commercial driving created potential liability for every passenger she'd transported, every accident she might have caused, and every tax obligation she'd incurred in my name. Dad, covering up hit-and-run accidents isn't fixing problems, it's compounding crimes. Rebecca didn't repair my car to protect me, she did it to protect herself from consequences. The server approached the table with the tentative expression of someone who could sense family tension, but needed to do their job anyway. We ordered drinks and appetizers that none of us would touch, going through the motions of a normal family dinner while discussing criminal behavior and federal investigations. After the server left, Rebecca finally abandoned her defensive posture and collapsed into what appeared to be genuine despair. I know I ruined everything. I know Kyle left because of what I did, and now I'm going to lose my apartment because I can't make rent without the rideshare money. I've destroyed my life and hurt everyone I care about. The admission was the closest she'd come to taking full responsibility for her choices, but it was accompanied by the familiar undertone of victimhood that had characterized her approach to every crisis throughout our adult lives. Rebecca, you didn't ruin everything accidentally. You made specific choices to steal my car, use my identity, and lie about what you were doing. Those weren't mistakes, they were decisions. But what am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice rising with panic. I can't get a job because background checks show pending criminal investigations. I can't afford a lawyer because I spent all the rideshare money on rent and bills. I can't even apply for legitimate work because I'm terrified the police will arrest me. The litany of consequences was accurate, but Rebecca presented them as unfair persecution rather than natural results of her criminal activity. She'd created an impossible situation for herself and was now seeking family intervention to escape accountability. Rebecca, you're supposed to face the consequences of your choices like an adult. You're supposed to hire a lawyer, cooperate with investigators, and accept whatever legal penalties result from your crimes. Mija, your sister is asking for help, not a lecture. This family has always supported each other through difficult times. Mom, this family has always enabled Rebecca's bad decisions by protecting her from consequences. That pattern is exactly what led her to committing federal crimes. Jessica, that's enough. David's voice carried the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood when my questions or complaints threatened family stability. Rebecca is your sister, and she needs our support now more than ever. We didn't raise you to abandon family when things get difficult. The familiar guilt trip carried less weight than it once had, partly because I'd spent 2 weeks consulting with lawyers who'd helped me understand the scope of my own legal exposure. Rebecca's use of my identity for commercial driving created potential liability for every passenger she'd transported, every accident she might have caused, and every tax obligation she'd incurred in my name. Dad, covering up hit-and-run accidents isn't fixing problems, it's compounding crimes. Rebecca didn't repair my car to protect me, she did it to protect herself from consequences. The server returned with our drinks, creating a brief interruption that allowed everyone to process what I'd said. When she left, the silence stretched until Linda broke it with the kind of emotional manipulation that had characterized our family dynamics for decades. Jessica, I'm disappointed in you. When your sister needed help the most, you chose to involve strangers instead of working with your family to find solutions. You've turned a private matter into a public spectacle that will hurt all of us. The suggestion that I'd created this situation by involving the authorities rather than covering up criminal activity.
Rebecca's crimes was breathtaking in its audacity, but it was also perfectly consistent with our family's approach to problem solving. Protecting family members from consequences had always taken precedence over honesty, accountability, or legal compliance. Mom, Rebecca turned this into a public matter when she committed federal crimes.
I didn't involve strangers. Rebecca involved federal investigators by committing identity theft and tax evasion. David tried a different approach, appealing to my practical nature with financial arguments. Princesa, fighting this through lawyers and courts is going to cost everyone thousands of dollars. Wouldn't it be better to work out a family solution where Rebecca pays you back over time and we all move forward together? Dad, Rebecca stole $18,000 and caused $60,000 in accident damage. She's created tax liabilities and potential civil lawsuits that could continue for years. This isn't something that can be resolved with payment plans. But we're family, Rebecca said desperately. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? Doesn't 28 years of being sisters count for something? The appeal to our shared history was Rebecca's final attempt at emotional manipulation. But those 28 years included decades of similar patterns where her problems became everyone's emergencies, while my boundaries were treated as negotiable suggestions. Rebecca, being sisters means I love you enough to stop enabling your criminal behavior. It means I won't help you avoid consequences that might actually motivate you to make better choices. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through various combinations of guilt trips, emotional appeals, and attempts to reframe Rebecca's crimes as family matters that could be resolved through private negotiations. My parents' commitment to protecting Rebecca from accountability remained absolute, even when presented with evidence of federal crimes that could result in prison sentences. When we finally left the restaurant, nothing had been resolved except my understanding that our family would never acknowledge the seriousness of Rebecca's actions or my right to protect myself from their consequences. The choice between maintaining family relationships and maintaining legal compliance had become unavoidable. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different Austin restaurant with my coworker Mike Rodriguez and his wife Sarah, celebrating my promotion to senior software architect. The mobile payment platform I'd presented in Denver had secured major funding, leading to expansion opportunities that would have seemed impossible during those dark weeks when Rebecca's crimes dominated my life. My new apartment in the Domain felt like a sanctuary designed specifically for my needs rather than my family's expectations. Smaller than my previous place, but infinitely more peaceful. It represented the first living space I'd chosen without considering how it might accommodate family emergencies or unexpected visitors who needed temporary assistance. The legal resolution of Rebecca's case had taken months of investigations, plea negotiations, and court appearances that tested everyone's endurance. She'd ultimately plead guilty to multiple charges in exchange for probation and restitution payments, avoiding prison time but acquiring a criminal record that would affect her employment prospects for years. My parents had attended every court hearing, sitting in the gallery like devoted supporters rather than acknowledging that Rebecca's punishment was the direct result of her choices. They'd paid for her lawyer, covered her fines, and helped her find employment with one of David's landscaping clients who was willing to hire someone with a criminal background. The family dynamics I'd grown up with remained largely unchanged, except for my absence from the regular crisis management cycle. Rebecca continued making poor decisions that required parental intervention, while Linda and David continued believing that family loyalty meant protecting her from consequences rather than helping her develop better judgment. "Jess, you look like someone who finally got her life back," Sarah observed, raising her wine glass in a toast. "I remember how stressed you were during all that legal stuff with your sister. You seem like a completely different person now." The observation was accurate in ways that went beyond the criminal case resolution. Establishing boundaries with Rebecca had required establishing boundaries with my entire family system, creating space for relationships based on mutual respect rather than unilateral obligation. Mike nodded in agreement. "It's amazing how much energy gets freed up when you stop managing other people's crises. You've been more creative at work, more relaxed in meetings, just generally happier." The professional recognition was gratifying, but the personal piece was transformative. For the first time in my adult life, my financial resources belonged entirely to me. My time was allocated according to my priorities, and my living space served as a sanctuary rather than a crisis management center. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Foster, my college friend who'd recently moved back to Austin. "Wine night tomorrow? I have gossip about my dating app disasters that will make you feel much better about being single." The casual invitation represented the kind of friendship I'd been too stressed and overwhelmed to maintain during the years when Rebecca's emergencies consumed my emotional bandwidth. Amanda's problems were normal adult challenges that didn't require financial rescue or legal intervention, making our relationship reciprocal rather than extractive. Sounds perfect. My place at 7? As I typed the response, I realized that normal friendships felt foreign after years of relationships defined by crisis management and resource transfer.
Solver was an ongoing process that required conscious effort. The server brought our entrees, and conversation shifted to Mike's upcoming vacation plans and Sarah's new job in nonprofit fundraising. Their problems were the manageable kind that adults solved through planning and effort, rather than emergency family meetings and desperate appeals for financial assistance. "Jess, can I ask you something personal?" Sarah's voice carried the tone of someone who'd been thinking about a question for a while. "Do you ever regret how things turned out with your family? I mean, I know your sister did terrible things, but it must be hard to lose those relationships." The question touched on something I'd been processing in therapy for months. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the counselor I'd started seeing during the worst of Rebecca's legal crisis, had helped me understand the difference between healthy guilt and manipulative guilt, between legitimate family obligations and enabling destructive behavior. I regret that Rebecca chose criminal activity over honest communication. I regret that my parents prioritized protecting her from consequences over helping her develop accountability. But I don't regret refusing to participate in a family system that required me to commit crimes to maintain relationships. Mike looked thoughtful as he processed my answer. That's a really mature way to look at it. It must have been tempting to just cover everything up and avoid all the legal drama. It was tempting for about 5 minutes until I realized that covering up Rebecca's crimes would have made me an accomplice to federal offenses. Family loyalty doesn't extend to committing felonies. The conversation reminded me of similar discussions I'd had with Dr. Harper about the difference between love and enabling. Loving Rebecca meant wanting her to develop into a functional adult who could maintain relationships without exploiting them. Enabling Rebecca meant protecting her from consequences that might motivate positive changes. Sarah raised another question that had been occupying my thoughts recently. Do you think there's any chance of reconciliation down the road? Like, if Rebecca really changes and takes responsibility for what she did? The possibility wasn't something I'd ruled out entirely, but it would require fundamental changes in Rebecca's approach to accountability and our family's approach to crisis management. Rebecca would need to demonstrate sustained pattern changes, rather than temporary improvements motivated by immediate consequences. Maybe, but it would require Rebecca acknowledging that what she did was criminal behavior, not desperate survival. It would require my parents stopping their enabling patterns, and it would require everyone accepting that my boundaries aren't negotiable. Mike nodded slowly. Those are pretty significant requirements. Do you think they're realistic? Honestly, probably not. Rebecca has spent 30 years learning that family relationships will absorb the consequences of her bad decisions. My parents have spent 30 years believing that protecting her from accountability is the same thing as loving her. Those patterns are deeply ingrained. The acknowledgement felt sad, but also liberating. Accepting that my family might never develop healthier dynamics freed me from the exhausting work of trying to manage their choices while protecting myself from their consequences. As we finished dinner and prepared to leave, Sarah made one final observation that captured something I'd been struggling to articulate. "Jess, I hope you know that choosing yourself over family dysfunction doesn't make you selfish. It makes you healthy. The fact that your family can't see the difference says more about them than it does about you." The validation from someone outside my family system carried weight that years of therapy and legal consultation had attempted to provide. Sometimes healing requires external perspectives that aren't influenced by decades of established patterns and emotional manipulation. Walking to my car in the restaurant parking lot, I reflected on how different my life felt now that it belonged entirely to me. The absence of constant family crises had created space for career advancement, genuine friendships, and personal interests that had been neglected during years of emergency management. My phone showed a missed call from Linda Martinez, the first contact attempt in over a month. The voicemail notification sat unopened while I decided whether engaging with family drama served any productive purpose. The choice to respond or not respond was mine to make, without guilt
or pressure, a freedom that had taken months to fully internalize. Rebecca's crimes had destroyed our relationship, but they'd also revealed its fundamental dysfunction. The theft of my car and identity had been possible because I'd allowed smaller boundary violations to go unaddressed for years. Learning to protect myself from family exploitation had required acknowledging that love doesn't require accepting abuse. 6 months later, my life was smaller in some ways, but infinitely more peaceful. Rebecca's chaos no longer defined my priorities. My parents' disappointment no longer influenced my decisions, and my resources belonged to me, rather than serving as emergency backup for other people's poor choices. The drive home through Austin's evening traffic felt different now, like I was traveling towards sanctuary rather than potential crisis. My apartment waited with its carefully chosen furniture, its peaceful atmosphere, and its complete absence of family drama that required immediate intervention. Some relationships don't survive accountability, but the ones that remain become stronger and more authentic. Rebecca had taught me valuable lessons about boundaries, consequences, and the difference between love and family enabling. The education had been expensive and painful, but it had also been necessary for my growth into someone who could maintain healthy relationships.
Based on mutual respect rather than unilateral obligation. As I pulled into my parking space, I realized that protecting myself from Rebecca's choices had been the most loving thing I could do for both of us. She needed to learn that criminal behavior has consequences, and I needed to learn that family relationships shouldn't require sacrificing personal integrity. The lesson had taken 28 years to learn, but some education is worth any price. 18 months had passed since the family meeting at Chili's when my doorbell rang on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I was working late on a new security protocol for our mobile payment platform, the kind of focused development work that had become possible once my life stopped revolving around family emergencies and crisis management. Through the people, I saw Rebecca standing alone on my doorstep. Her appearance dramatically changed from the last time we'd been in the same room. She'd lost significant weight. Her hair was shorter and styled differently, and she wore clothes that looked professional rather than borrowed or discount purchased. More striking than the physical changes was something in her posture that suggested genuine humility rather than the performative contrition I'd grown accustomed to over the years. I opened the door, but remained in the threshold, uncertain about her intentions and unprepared for the flood of emotions that seeing her triggered. Rebecca looked older, more mature somehow, as if the legal consequences and relationship losses had forced a kind of growth that decades of family enabling had prevented. "Hi, Jess. I know I should have called first, but I was afraid you'd hang up on me. I've been wanting to talk to you for months, but I needed time to figure out what I actually wanted to say." Her voice carried none of the desperate urgency that had characterized our previous interactions. No immediate crisis required my intervention, no emergency demanded my financial assistance, no deadline created pressure for quick decisions that bypassed careful consideration. "Rebecca, what do you want?" The question came out more harshly than I'd intended, but 18 months of peace had made me protective of the stability I'd built. Seeing her triggered automatic defenses against the manipulation tactics and emotional exploitation that had defined our relationship for decades. "I want to apologize. Not the kind of apology where I explain why I did what I did or ask you to understand my circumstances. Just an acknowledgement that I stole from you, lied to you, and used your trust to commit crimes that could have destroyed your life." The words were startling in their directness. Throughout our lives, Rebecca's apologies had been elaborate performances that minimized her responsibility while emphasizing external factors that had influenced her choices. This felt different, though. I remained skeptical about whether the change was genuine or tactical. "Okay, I'm listening." She shifted nervously, glancing at the covered parking area where my new Honda Civic sat, protected from the rain. I traded in the CRV months earlier, unable to feel comfortable driving a vehicle that Rebecca had used for illegal activities. The Civic represented a fresh start, untainted by memories of theft and violation. "Your place looks amazing, Jess. It feels like you, if that makes sense." "It makes sense.
When you're not constantly managing other people's crises, you have time to figure out what you actually like. She winced at the observation, but didn't argue or deflect, another departure from her historical patterns of response. We sat on opposite ends of my couch, the physical distance reflecting the emotional distance that had developed over the past 18 months. Rebecca, why are you here? What do you want from this conversation? Honestly, I'm not sure. I've been in therapy for a year, working through why I made the choices I made and how I can avoid making similar ones in the future. My therapist suggested that making genuine amends might be part of my healing process, but she was clear that this was about me taking responsibility, not about expecting forgiveness or reconciliation. The mention of therapy was encouraging, suggesting that Rebecca was seeking professional help rather than relying on family members to solve her problems. But I'd learned to be cautious about temporary improvements that might revert to old patterns once immediate consequences faded. What have you learned in therapy? Rebecca took a deep breath before answering, as if she'd rehearsed this part of the conversation extensively. I learned that I spent 30 years believing that my problems were everyone else's responsibility to solve. When I was struggling financially, I thought it was your job to help me rather than my job to find sustainable solutions. When I made bad decisions, I expected family to absorb the consequences so I wouldn't have to face them.
Acknowledgement was more honest than any self-assessment Rebecca had ever offered during our previous conversations about her behavior. She was describing patterns that had taken me years to recognize and months of therapy to understand clearly. I also learned that taking your car wasn't desperation, it was entitlement. I felt entitled to use your resources without permission because I'd gotten away with smaller violations for so long that bigger ones seemed acceptable. The distinction between desperation and entitlement was crucial, representing the difference between someone who'd made poor choices under pressure and someone who'd developed a systematic approach to exploiting family relationships. Rebecca's recognition of this difference suggested genuine insight rather than temporary remorse. Rebecca, acknowledging the pattern is important, but how do I know this isn't just another manipulation tactic? You've apologized before, usually when you needed something or when consequences were becoming unavoidable. You don't know, and you shouldn't trust me based on words alone. I've broken your trust too many times for speeches to repair anything. The only way to rebuild trust is through consistent actions over time, and I understand that might take years, if it's even possible. Her response demonstrated an understanding of accountability that had been absent from our relationship for decades. Previous apologies had come with expectations of immediate forgiveness and relationship restoration, while this conversation acknowledged that trust repair required sustained effort without guaranteed outcomes. What's your life like now? Complicated but honest. I work for a small accounting firm that specializes in helping people with criminal records find legitimate employment. The pay is terrible and the work is boring, but it's legal and it's mine. I live in a studio apartment near Riverside that costs half my income, but I'm paying my own rent without help from family or boyfriends. The description painted a picture of genuine independence, rather than the artificial stability that family financial support had provided throughout her adult life. Living within her means, however uncomfortable, represented a fundamental shift from the lifestyle inflation that had characterized her previous relationships and living situations. I'm also paying restitution to your insurance company, $50 a month until the full amount is covered. It'll take me 15 years at this rate, but it's something I can actually afford without creating new financial problems. The mention of restitution payments surprised me. The court had ordered financial compensation, but I'd assumed Rebecca would find ways to avoid or minimize those obligations, as she had with previous debts and financial commitments. You're actually making the payments? Every month, on time. It's not much money, but it's consistent, and it reminds me that my choices have long-term consequences that affect other people. Missing a payment would be easy to justify in the short term, but it would represent reverting to the same thinking patterns that led to stealing your car.
The explanation suggested that Rebecca was using the restitution payments as a form of ongoing accountability rather than viewing them as punishment to be avoided. This approach represented a fundamental shift in how she understood the relationship between choices and consequences. We talked for over 2 hours, covering topics that had been impossible to discuss during the years when every conversation was shaped by immediate crises or financial emergencies. Rebecca asked about my work, my friends, my life, in ways that suggested genuine interest rather than information gathering for future manipulation. Jess, can I ask you something personal? Do you think there's any possibility that we could have some kind of relationship in the future? Not like before, obviously, but maybe something healthier? The question was one I'd been avoiding in therapy and personal reflection for months. Dr. Harper had helped me understand that reconciliation was possible, but not guaranteed, and that it would require sustained changes from Rebecca rather than temporary improvements motivated by immediate consequences. I don't know, Rebecca. Honestly, I don't know if I can trust you enough to have a real relationship again. The theft and fraud were serious violations, but the lying was worse. You looked me in the eye and denied everything even when presented with evidence. That kind of deception is hard to recover from. I understand. I'm not asking for anything immediate or specific. I'm just asking if the door is completely closed or if there might be some possibility in the future if I continue making better choices. The question forced me to examine my own feelings about family relationships and forgiveness. Cutting ties with Rebecca had been necessary for my emotional and financial protection, but it had also meant losing the sister I'd grown up with, despite all her flaws and mistakes. The door isn't completely closed, but it's not open either. If you want any possibility of reconciliation, it would require years of consistent behavior changes. No more crisis calls, no more financial emergencies, no more lies about small things or big things. It would require you becoming someone I can trust with basic information about my life. Rebecca nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response and had already accepted its implications. That's fair. More than fair, actually. I know I have a lot of work to do, and I know there are no guarantees about how things will turn out. Before she left, Rebecca handed me a small envelope with my name written in her familiar handwriting. This is a letter I wrote in therapy. My counselor suggested writing down everything I wanted to say to you, whether or not I ever had the chance to say it in person. You don't have to read it now or ever, but I wanted you to have it. After she left, I sat on my couch holding the envelope and trying to process the conversation. The Rebecca who'd visited me felt
like a different person from the one who'd stolen my car and lied about it repeatedly. Whether the change was genuine or temporary remained to be seen, but the conversation had been more honest than any interaction we'd had in years. I opened the letter later that evening, finding 3 pages of handwritten text that detailed Rebecca's understanding of how her choices had affected me and our family. The tone was consistently accountable without being self-pitying, acknowledging specific instances where she'd prioritized her immediate needs over my well-being and trust. One paragraph stood out particularly clearly. I realize now that I spent years treating you like a backup plan for when my real plans failed, rather than like a sister who deserved honesty and respect. I used your love for me as a way to avoid facing the consequences of my choices, and I convinced myself that your willingness to help meant that my problems were your responsibility to solve. I see now how wrong that was, and how much damage it did to both of us. The letter concluded with a commitment to continue therapy and personal growth without expecting anything from me in return. Rebecca acknowledged that rebuilding trust would require sustained effort over years with no guarantee of success, and she accepted full responsibility for the relationship damage her choices had created. Dr. Harper and I discussed the visit and letter during my next therapy session, exploring my mixed feelings about the possibility of reconciliation. The conversation had stirred up emotions I'd worked hard to resolve, but it had also provided evidence that people could change if they were willing to do the difficult work of examining their patterns and motivations. Jessica,
How do you feel about the possibility that Rebecca might genuinely be changing? Dr. Harper asked during our session. Hopeful, but cautious. I want to believe that people can change, but I also know that I've been manipulated before by temporary improvements that didn't last. I'm not willing to risk my emotional or financial security based on one conversation. That sounds like a healthy approach. You can be open to the possibility of change while maintaining appropriate boundaries to protect yourself. The distinction between openness and vulnerability was important. I could acknowledge Rebecca's apparent growth without immediately trusting her with sensitive information or financial assistance. Reconciliation, if it happened, would need to develop gradually based on consistent actions rather than immediate declarations of change. Over the following months, Rebecca maintained minimal but respectful contact. She sent brief text messages on my birthday and major holidays, not asking for anything, but simply acknowledging our shared history in ways that felt genuine rather than manipulative. The messages were carefully neutral, avoiding both excessive emotion and complete coldness. She also continued making her monthly restitution payments without drama or requests for sympathy about her financial struggles. Dr. Harper helped me understand that these small, consistent actions were more meaningful than grand gestures or emotional appeals would have been. Real change happens slowly and quietly, she explained during one of our sessions. People who are genuinely committed to accountability focus on consistent actions rather than dramatic demonstrations. 6 months after Rebecca's visit, I received a call from my mother for the first time since the restaurant confrontation. Linda's voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before, less defensive and more reflective. Mija, I've been thinking about our conversation at Chili's, and I want you to know that I understand better now why you made the choices you made. The admission surprised me, suggesting that my parents had spent considerable time processing the events of the past 2 years, rather than simply maintaining their original positions. What's changed, Mom? Rebecca has been different since her legal troubles ended. She doesn't call us with emergencies anymore, she doesn't ask for money, and she seems to be handling her problems independently. At first, your father and I thought she was just being stubborn, but now we're wondering if maybe she needed to learn how to solve her own problems. The observations suggested that my parents were beginning to understand the connection between their enabling behaviors and Rebecca's inability to develop functional coping skills. This recognition represented a significant shift from their previous belief that family support meant protecting Rebecca from all consequences. Mom, I'm glad to hear that Rebecca is becoming more independent. That's what I always hoped would happen if she faced real consequences for her choices. I think maybe we made mistakes in how we handled things when you girls were growing up. We always tried to protect Rebecca because she seemed more fragile, but maybe that protection prevented her from learning important lessons. The acknowledgement was remarkable, representing the first time either parent had questioned their approach to managing family dynamics in crisis situations. Linda's willingness to examine their historical patterns suggested the possibility of healthier family relationships in the future. Mija, would you consider having dinner with your father and me sometime? Not to talk about Rebecca or try to fix anything, just to see each other and remember that we're still family despite everything that's happened. The invitation was tempting, but also concerning. My relationship with my parents had been so intertwined with managing Rebecca's problems that I wasn't sure what it would look like without that central organizing principle. Mom, I'd be willing to consider it, but I need you to understand that my boundaries with Rebecca apply to family conversations too. I won't participate in crisis management or emergency problem solving. I understand, Mija. We're not asking you to fix anything or help with
Anything. We just miss you and want to see how you're doing. We scheduled a lunch meeting for the following weekend at a restaurant neither of us had been to before, neutral territory that wouldn't carry memories of previous family conflicts or confrontations. The prospect felt both exciting and terrifying, representing a potential opportunity to rebuild family relationships on healthier foundations. The lunch went better than I'd dared hope. My parents asked about my work, my apartment, my friends, showing genuine interest in my life rather than viewing me primarily as a resource for solving family problems. We avoided discussing Rebecca entirely, focusing instead on topics that didn't require crisis management or emergency intervention. Princessa, you look happy, my father observed near the end of our meal. Different than you used to look when you were always worried about family problems. The comment suggested that my parents had recognized the stress and exhaustion that managing Rebecca's crises had created in my life, even if they hadn't understood its full impact at the time. I am happy, Dad. It turns out that when you're not constantly managing other people's emergencies, you have time and energy for your own interests and goals. Linda nodded thoughtfully. We see that with Rebecca, too. Since she stopped calling us for help with every problem, she seems more confident and capable. Maybe we were helping too much instead of helping effectively. The distinction between helping too much and helping effectively captured something important about family dynamics and enabling behaviors. True help should increase someone's capability and independence, rather than creating ongoing dependence on external intervention. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, my mother made a request that surprised me with its directness and honesty. Mija, would you be willing to have regular dinners with us? Maybe once a month, just to stay connected as a family. I know we made mistakes, but we love you and want to be part of your life in whatever way works for you. The invitation represented an opportunity to rebuild family relationships based on mutual respect rather than crisis management, though I remained cautious about reverting to old patterns that prioritized family harmony over personal boundaries. I'd like that, Mom, as long as we can maintain the boundaries we've established today. I want to have a relationship with you and Dad that doesn't involve managing Rebecca's problems or absorbing the consequences of anyone else's choices. We understand and we agree. We want to get to know the person you've become when you're not constantly worried about family crises. 2 years after the theft of my car had forced a reckoning with decades of family dysfunction, I found myself cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding relationships with both Rebecca and my parents. The changes appeared genuine and sustained, rather than temporary improvements motivated by immediate consequences. Rebecca had maintained her therapy, her job, and her restitution payments without drama or requests for assistance. My parents had stopped calling me about family emergencies and had begun developing direct relationships with me that weren't mediated through crisis management. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate, but it had been worth the difficulty and emotional cost. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to protect them from the consequences of their choices, even when that refusal feels cruel in the short term. My life looked completely different now than it had during the years when family dysfunction defined my priorities and consumed my resources. I had genuine friendships, a thriving career, financial security, and most importantly, relationships based on mutual respect rather than unilateral obligation. The theft of my car had been a violation that could have destroyed my life, but it had also been the catalyst for changes that ultimately saved my relationships with everyone I cared about. Rebecca had needed to learn accountability, my parents had needed to learn the difference between helping and enabling, and I had needed to learn that love doesn't require accepting abuse. Some education is worth any price, especially when it leads to healthier relationships and authentic connection. The woman I'd become through establishing boundaries and demanding accountability was someone I actually liked spending time with. A remarkable change from the stressed, exhausted person who'd spent years managing other people's crises at the expense of her own well-being. Looking back, I realized that Rebecca's crimes had been the best thing that ever happened to our family relationships, even though the immediate consequences had felt devastating. Sometimes destruction is necessary for reconstruction, and sometimes the most loving choice is the one that feels cruelest in the moment. The phone calls had stopped, the emergency meetings had ended, the financial drain had been eliminated. What remained were relationships based on choice rather than obligation, built on respect rather than exploitation, and sustained by genuine affection rather than manipulative guilt. Rebecca had stolen my car, but in the process, she'd forced all of us to examine whether our family relationships were worth preserving or whether they needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. The reconstruction was still ongoing, but the foundation was stronger than anything we'd built before. 3 years had passed since that rainy evening when Rebecca appeared at my doorstep seeking genuine reconciliation rather than immediate assistance. The gradual rebuilding of our relationship had been more difficult and more rewarding than either of us had anticipated, requiring patience and commitment that our family had never demonstrated during decades of crisis management and emergency interventions.
Rebecca's transformation had proven sustainable rather than temporary improvements motivated by immediate consequences.
Temporary. She'd been promoted twice at the accounting firm, earned her certification to work with small business clients, and moved into a one-bedroom apartment that she furnished slowly with items she'd saved for rather than purchased impulsively. More importantly, she'd maintained her therapy sessions and continued making restitution payments without complaint or requests for sympathy. Our contact had evolved from careful text messages to occasional coffee meetings where we discussed books, work challenges, and current events rather than family drama or financial emergencies. These conversations felt foreign initially, like learning a new language after decades of communication patterns built around crisis and consequences. Jess, can I tell you something? Rebecca asked during one of our monthly coffee dates at a downtown Austin cafe we'd both grown to enjoy. I keep waiting for you to trust me with something important, like asking me to watch your apartment while you're traveling or letting me help with some project. Then I remembered that trust isn't something I can earn through grand gestures. It's something that develops slowly through consistency. Her observation demonstrated the kind of insight that therapy had helped her develop over 3 years of sustained effort. Rebecca had learned to recognize her own impatience with accountability and her historical expectation that apologies should immediately restore privileges that had been revoked due to bad behavior. Rebecca, the fact that you understand that difference shows how much you've changed. The old you would have been frustrated that I wasn't moving faster toward complete forgiveness and normal sibling relationships. The old me would have created some emergency that required your immediate assistance, then used your help as evidence that you'd forgiven me completely, she admitted with uncomfortable honesty. I spent years confusing your willingness to help with approval of my choices. These conversations had become a form of relationship rehabilitation that neither of us had anticipated when she'd first appeared seeking reconciliation. We were learning to interact as adults who respected each other's boundaries, rather than as siblings locked in patterns of exploitation and enabling that had defined our relationship since childhood. My parents had undergone their own transformation during these 3 years, though their changes had been less dramatic and more gradual than Rebecca's complete life restructuring. They had stopped calling me about family emergencies because genuine emergencies had become rare once Rebecca learned to solve problems independently rather than escalating every challenge into a crisis. Linda and David had also begun developing individual relationships with me that weren't mediated through their concerns about Rebecca's welfare. My father shared updates about his landscaping business and asked for advice about technology upgrades that could improve their efficiency. My mother talked about her book club, her garden, and neighborhood gossip that didn't require immediate intervention or family meetings. Your parents seem happier when they're not constantly managing Rebecca's crises, Dr. Harper observed during one of our sessions, which had shifted from weekly crisis management to monthly maintenance of the healthy boundaries I had established. I think everyone is happier when they're living their own lives rather than managing other people's problems, I replied, recognizing how much my own stress levels had decreased once I'd stopped accepting responsibility for solving challenges that belonged to other adults. The monthly family dinners had become a source of genuine enjoyment rather than obligatory duty. We gathered at different restaurants around Austin, sharing meals and conversations that focused on current interests rather than historical grievances or ongoing crises. Rebecca joined us occasionally, but not always, allowing the family relationships to develop independently rather than forcing premature group reconciliation. My professional life had flourished during these 3 years of family stability. The mobile payment platform I'd developed had been acquired by a major financial technology company, resulting in stock options that provided financial security I had never imagined possible. More importantly, my work relationships had deepened into genuine friendships because I was emotionally available for reciprocal connection rather than constantly distracted by family emergencies. Amanda Foster had become my closest friend, someone who knew my complete history with Rebecca, but wasn't defined by it. Our friendship was built on shared interests and mutual support rather than crisis management, representing the kind of adult relationship I'd been too stressed and overwhelmed to maintain during the years when family dysfunction consumed my emotional bandwidth. Jess, you know what I've noticed about you lately? Amanda asked during one of our wine nights at my apartment. You seem surprised when good things happen to you, like you're still expecting some family emergency to ruin whatever success or happiness you've achieved. Her observation touched on something I'd been discussing with Dr. Harper for months. Years of family crises had conditioned me to anticipate problems and prepare for emergencies, making it difficult to fully enjoy achievements or relax into happiness without waiting for the other shoe to drop. I think I'm finally learning that my success doesn't have to be shared with people who didn't contribute to it, I replied, recognizing how radical this concept felt after decades of family programming that positioned my achievements as community resources rather than personal accomplishments. The evening Rebecca called to tell me she was engaged to someone I'd never met marked another milestone in our relationship reconstruction.
Her during her period of growth and accountability, rather than during her years of crisis and manipulation. I wanted you to hear it from me rather than from Mom and Dad, she said, her voice carrying excitement tempered by awareness that our relationship was still rebuilding. I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet him sometime, not as some test of whether you approve, but because he's important to me and you're important to me. The request was made without pressure or manipulation, acknowledging my right to decline while expressing genuine hope for my participation in her happiness. This approach represented a fundamental shift from her historical pattern of creating emotional urgency around every request and treating any hesitation as family disloyalty. I'd like to meet him, Rebecca. Maybe we could all have dinner sometime when it works for everyone's schedules. The conversation ended with plans for a casual group dinner that included Marcus, Amanda, and potentially my parents, creating a social gathering rather than a high-stakes family evaluation. Rebecca's willingness to integrate her new relationship into our gradually healing family dynamics showed respect for the boundaries we'd established while building toward broader connection. Standing in my apartment after that phone call, I realized that the woman who'd stolen my car and nearly destroyed both our lives had become someone I genuinely liked spending time with. The transformation hadn't erased the pain of her betrayal or the consequences of her criminal choices, but it had created the possibility of a relationship built on respect rather than exploitation. The journey from theft to reconciliation had taken 4 years of sustained effort from everyone involved. Rebecca had needed to develop accountability and independence. My parents had needed to learn the difference between helping and enabling. I had needed to establish boundaries and maintain them despite family pressure and emotional manipulation. Most importantly, we'd all needed to accept that love doesn't require accepting abuse, that family relationships should enhance rather than exploit, and that protecting someone from consequences often prevents the growth that those consequences could facilitate. Rebecca's crimes had been the catalyst for changes that ultimately saved our family relationships by forcing us to rebuild them on healthier foundations. Sometimes destruction is necessary for reconstruction, and sometimes the most loving choice is the one that feels cruelest in the moment. The woman I'd become through this process was someone I actually enjoyed being, a remarkable change from the stressed, exhausted person who'd spent years managing other people's crises at the expense of her own well-being. Looking ahead, I felt optimistic about the future in ways that would have seemed impossible during those dark weeks when Rebecca's legal troubles dominated every aspect of my life. The relationships I'd rebuilt were stronger than what we'd had before because they were based on choice rather than obligation, built on respect rather than manipulation, and sustained by genuine affection rather than guilty compliance. Some education is worth any price, especially when it leads to authentic connection and mutual respect. The phone calls had stopped, the emergency meetings had ended, and what remained were relationships worth maintaining because they enhanced rather than diminish everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.